Master jessercohen here from Summer School of Chess with another quick tidbit video for you today. Today, by request from the comments, we are going to be looking at a game from no other than ex-world champion Tigran Petrosian. For those who don't know, Tigran Petrosian was the one who dethroned Mikhail Botvinnik, and was eventually dethroned by Boris Spassky, who was eventually dethroned by Bobby Fischer. Some things that you might want to know about Tigran that are interesting. He was called Iron Tigran. His style was very positional, and he was described kind of like a python. He would just play positionally and just kind of strangle you. And great attackers of the time, like Mikhail Tal and Bobby Fischer, said that one of the hardest things about playing him is that it's not that he couldn't see tactics. You see, the thing about Tigran is he didn't have a lot of fireworks typically. Typically, it was just kind of the slow squeeze. And they said that it was just so hard to attack him because he saw tactics and attacks like 20 moves in advance, they claimed, so that you could never really get one going. Now, this game that we're going to look at today is the first game that I could find, the earliest game that he's ever played on record. He was only 15 at the time of this game. Let's just jump right in and see some of these interesting points here. So, we basically have a standard Ruy Lopez. Remember in the opening, we're just getting at our pieces, fighting for the center, getting our king safe. I'll go into an explanation of the Ruy Lopez in a different video. However, this is all standard play, believe it or not. And the point that I want to start from is right here. So, in this position, you might think that black is just better. Why? Well, black just seems like the pieces are more activated. Black's queen and rook are on this open file, whereas white's queen is still undeveloped. Yeah, both rooks are still in the corner, but it just seems like black has more pieces that have come off the back rank compared to white. It seems like white only has a few pieces that have kind of come off the back rank, really. And yet, surprisingly, white is going to turn out to be better here. Let's take a look at this. I think this is actually the first key moment in the game that I find interesting, and that's knight takes knight. This might not actually seem so surprising at first glance, because as a basic principle, we should try to trade off more active pieces for our less active pieces. This knight is more active, it's more advanced and closer to our side, where it's putting pressure on some of our units compared with this 93. So taking that knight seems all too logical. However, for those who are familiar with the Ruy Lopez, this knight just went on quite the journey from d2 to f1 to e3, and normally its journey is trying to take him to d5, and then after an exchange of knights here, this bishop gets opened up for attacking potential on black's king. But in this position, Petrosian instead decides to simply capture this knight. Why? It's because black doesn't actually have that great of options. Black wants to play the move queen takes in order to recapture and keep the pathway open for attacking white. But white's going to save this bishop by playing bishop to b3 with tempo on the queen. And now black also has to realize that there's a double attack on this e-pawn compared to only one defense. The best move is probably queen back to c7, saving both. And then after a move even just like bishop to g5 perhaps, this queen is going to continue to be a target to white's pieces. There's also maybe moves like knight g5. Black is just going to keep getting kicked around, and it doesn't feel so great. As a result, black played the strange move, pawn takes. I say strange because pawns in a way are like walls. They kind of shut pieces down. This pawn is now shutting down the power that queen and rook were just generating just a moment ago. And Tigran makes sure that that's not going to change. Bishop d2. Black would love it to play pawn c3 and have us exchange off and have that queen and rook come back to life with some double attacks. Bishop c3 says that's not ever going to happen. Pawn to a5, Bishop c3. Something else that I like about this little itty-bitty maneuver by Petrosian, it just goes to show that even at his youngest of ages, he had a really keen sense of positional understanding. The bishop on c3 serves so many useful purposes. For one, the pawn on b2 could easily become a target on this half-open file to black's rooks, but the bishop easily puts that to rest. The bishop also on c3 is applying enormous pressure to black's center. Notice that one of the main advantages that white has in this position is a 2-to-1 advantage in the center, and so destroying black's center would definitely increase that advantage. Pawn takes pawn. There's not really a good way to solve it. Knight takes back. Pawn to a4. Black would really, really like to play pawn a3 and exchange off for the b pawn that's supporting the bishop on c3. This would also make the pawn on c4 a pass pawn. The b pawn is the only pawn left that can stop that c pawn. So you know what? We're just going to freeze it. Now I want everyone to just take a nice look at this position. I think that without any of my explanation, if I were to ask you right now, who's better in this position? Think about that question for a second. I'm going to actually go over an entire video on that simple question. Who's better? If you want to be a good chess player, you've got to be able to look at a position and accurately be able to assess who is better, if anybody, and by how much. In this position, I think a lot of players would assess that black is at least equal, maybe even better. Because again, look at black's pieces compared to white's pieces. It just seems like black has more activated pieces compared to white's. But let's actually look at what they're doing for a second. Black's rook and queen seem active, but again, they're just biting on their own pawn. It's just rock. It's not doing anything. Same thing with this rook. Lots of places to move, but it's simply defending. Let's actually look at this bishop. That is a garbage bishop. It has almost nowhere to move. It's not doing anything aggressive whatsoever. How about this bishop? Yeah, it's off the back row, but it's merely trying to help defend this poor isolated pawn from the pressure that white actually has with the undeveloped queen and the bishop on c2. In fact, in this position, if you really take a deep look at it, which I'm not going to talk about so much this video, these are all juicy, juicy long-term targets that white is looking to capitalize on and apply a lot of pressure to until they break. And so black has to deal with these long-term pressured targets, and on top of that, has to try and untangle this position. Here's what happens. Pawn g6. This is the first super, super dangerous move. Why? The idea of this actually is good. Black recognizes that this bishop is not happy. What does the bishop need? It needs a nice open diagonal where it actually serves some purpose. Black realizes that if that bishop could relocate into g7 and this knight were to move, that it would have a nice open diagonal which would challenge that bishop, maybe even help undermine b2. It could actually be a decent piece. But that's not immediately there. And in the moment that black has played pawn g6, something has happened. Everyone, bring out your chess dictionaries if you don't know this term. Weak color complex. When black puts all these pawns on the light squares on the king side, all the pawns are on light squares. They attack light squares. But what about the dark squares? The dark squares are abandoned, and they are weak and vulnerable to white's pieces either invading or using them to attack. And that's exactly what happens. Queen d2. This move seems so innocent. Just little up move with the queen. But we are definitely eyeballing those dark squares. Knight e8. Again, we have the right ideas in mind. I think this bishop wants to go to f6 to challenge the center. I think this knight might want to fill in on g7 and maybe even try to maybe trade off for white's superior knight in the center on d4. But black is playing a lot of passive chess. Typically in chess, moving backwards can be a real pain in the butt, and it can oftentimes end up destroying you. I can tell you that at a more advanced level, if I make just a few too many moves that go backward and are purely for defensive purposes and are not offensive and aggressive, I typically lose. And in this position, Tigran Petrosian, the python that is used to squeezing you, simply finds a way to blow you up. Knight f5. Sacrificing the knight to the pawn, but opening up this bishop and trying to make a mate against this black king. Not taking this knight really isn't an option. We're threatening to take this bishop for free, which would fork the king and the rook. And knight h6 check is also a pretty annoying move with queen f4 ideas coming in on f7. It's a really ugly situation. So black takes it. And here, normally we'd be looking to just crash through immediately. White calmly captures back, opening up this rook, threatening to take the bishop. Black says, well, I think I'll keep my bishop. And here, Tigran plays one more move. Rook takes knight check, and black surrenders. Take a second. Do you see why? Black has to take back. But do you see why? What is white's next move that is completely and utterly crushing to black? Remember, before you see that move and play that move that you think is so great, you have to consider what is black's best defense after your awesome idea. If you saw the idea queen to h6, give yourself a pat on the back because you're looking for ways to attack black's king. And you should be looking to attack black's king. We just ripped open black's king by destroying a part of that shield pawn. And now we're threatening checkmate. It seems really good, right? We have to see how black's going to try and defend. And the way to defend here is pawn to f6, blocking the bishop and allowing this queen to come over and help defend. This would be a huge problem. In this position, the cool part about all this is that despite being down a rook, white has the amazing move, pawn f6, a quiet little move. The purpose of this is a few things. Number one, we are immediately threatening, let's say black just plays some random move, to play queen g5 check. Notice how the pawn is blocking the attack on the queen. And now, no matter if king f8 or if king h8, then queen to g7, kiss of death checkmate, queen and helper checkmate immediately to follow. On top of that, we're also blocking black's f-pawn, which a moment ago was allowing the defense against these type of checkmates. And realistically here, there's just no way to stop it all. For example, again, the main threat is queen g5. How could we try to stop it? If we play king h8 to try and make it so it's not check, white can still play queen g5 or queen h6, simply threatening to checkmate. And a sad look at black's position shows us that there's just no way to stop it. Bishop takes here, doesn't change anything. Bishop takes back is just mate. The bishop attacks the king, the queen covers everything else. Black could try the move here, queen c5. That tries to cover the g5 square against this idea. But now, queen h6. Again, we threaten just to checkmate black. And other than queen to g5, sacrificing the queen, or queen takes f2 check, sacrificing the queen, nothing is really going to stop that. And we're also threatening h7 with a series of mates as well. And there you have it. In this position, black realized what was going on and just decided to resign. So what is your takeaway from this? Whether it's one thing or many things, if you can find even one thing to take away from a chess video and try to apply it in your own games, that is a win. Please remember that. Something that I see, I'm going to address this in a different video as well, but something that I see with a lot of my students is that I'll give them an advanced idea or several advanced ideas, and they may or may not try it out in their own games. But if they do try it out in their own games, they might find that they're losing more than they were winning before. And they get frustrated and they don't understand, like, well, I'm doing more advanced strategies, shouldn't I be winning more? And the answer isn't necessarily yes at first. If I hand you a really advanced strategy, an idea, it's going to be very difficult to wield it. And it's going to take time and patience to wield it. And you might be better at using a lesser strategy and weaker at a stronger strategy, to the point where it seems like the weaker strategy is better. And at the moment it is better. But the better strategy, the master strategy, really does have the potential to be so much better. So again, take one of the strategies from this game, whether it is weak color complex, trying to punish your opponent's weaknesses, thinking about targets, all sorts of things. Thinking about the quality of your pieces, what they're actually doing compared to what they look like they're doing. Again, in this game, Black's pieces looked like they were decent, but in reality, they didn't do much at all. So, with that being said, I want to keep it short. This has gone long enough. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you again tomorrow. Please like, please subscribe, please let me know on Twitch or YouTube what you like about these videos. Let me know in the comments what you want the next video to be about. This video was specifically from a request that I had to do a Petrosian game. So, just so you know, I am taking your request and I will continue to do so. Again, I'm National Master Jessercohen from Summer School of Chess, and I cannot wait to see you again tomorrow. But until then, bye-bye!